seconds. 20 seconds. 15 seconds. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
In your face, all over the place.
We're online 24/7. 24/7.
You're listening to the hottest internet station.
From beautiful Saline in southeastern Michigan.
Around the world at sunsky.mysteries.com.
This is the 2009 Top 10 Webcam in the World winner. This is SETV.
Well, good evening, everybody. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Let me adjust the audio levels. Welcome to the apparently several thousand of you that have decided to tune in tonight. Let me give you a quick update on what's happening the rest of the week, and we'll get right to the show. On Friday night, we are going to have Sheriff Richard Mack on. He is an upkeeper. He is a retired county sheriff. He is the head of the County Sheriff Project, a member of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, and a member of Get Out of Our House, the plan to evict career politicos in the Congress and the Senate. He's going to be on Friday night at 7 p.m. Saturday, Alex Bachman of Conciencia Radio in Baja, Mexico will be returning with Boris Artemenko, our science producer. This episode, right here that you're watching tonight, will be on YouTube, if they let it, and it will be repeating on both the audio side as well as the video side until Friday night when Sheriff Mack comes on. And we'll probably just go ahead and swing it right back into repeats again since it's going to be so popular. Now, please visit our social site. You can see that at Saline ETV or wakeupin2012.com. It has the same features that you see on all the other social sites like Facebook and all the other ones, but the powers that be are not allowed to attend. Now, speaking of powers that be, I sit here night after night talking to all of these great minds. I talk to authors. I talk to the most amazing people that you could possibly come across in the world today. For whatever reason that they have, the evil empire of Google and all their greatness, all hail Google, all hail Google, has decided to put the hate on the informer, namely the show Surrounded by Idiots. Now, we come to the artificial world known as Google, and I have a couple of messages for Google. Once again, this past week, Google has claimed a copyright on my voice. Very nice. Appreciate that. I have a little message for YouTube as well, which is owned by Google. The music that I play on my own keyboard is copyrighted by me, not by you. Also, the audio signals that have been sent to us by astronomers that have been picking up signals from space is not copyright by YouTube. It's copyright by me. Thank you very much. Having the barrel of the gun known as Google pointed at me gets me pissed off. And when I am pissed off, I can't perform my task of hosting this show, which means that Google is now harming my business. I hope, as a matter of fact, and our guest is going to tell us about this, I hope the internet crashes and when it comes back, Google's not there anymore. So, my reasons for this interview tonight are completely selfish, and let me tell you why. Our guest is Clif High. He's on the line right now. Clif, how you doing tonight?
Doing fine, but I'm getting a great deal of echo here.
Oh, do you have the streaming page on by any chance?
No, I don't have that. No.
Oh boy. Doesn't that just...
Hang on. I just dropped a subroutine out of the background and we're good.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that. I have background
thank
processes
goodness.
all the time.
Thank goodness. Oh my God, another disaster looming before me. At any rate, ladies and gentlemen, my reason for having Clif High back on the show tonight is because, as Clif says, the temporal markers are falling rather quickly. Now, my wife is a primary caretaker for her mother. Her mother is a survivor of the Nazi occupation in France in World War II. She is obviously reaching the end of her lifespan. She is the primary caretaker for her mother. She is 2 hours away from me. She is in a city that Forbes magazine calls one of the 10 worst places to be. Now, when this crap hits the fan, folks, I want my wife home with me. And that's all there is to it. And the more information that I can get about the timeline, what may happen, and what we can expect, the more comfortable I will be. That's one of the reasons why I'm doing this show, is to inform others, because there's others I know out there just like me. I know you're out there. You want to know. You want this information. Last week, a couple of weeks ago, we had on a gentleman that filled in some of the holds that were left in our last conversation with Clif. If you recall, Clif dropped the bombshell about the new ice age that's coming. At last report, there were 600 deaths so far in Europe from the cold. This gentleman that was on, his name is Tariq Nazi, I believe. He is located in Dubai. He's one of those oil company geologist guys. He owns a big company over there. And he was on the show, and he has found scientific evidence that the ice sheet at the North Pole follows the magnetic North Pole. As you know, the magnetic North Pole is shooting right across Siberia right now, and the ice cap, the ice shelf up there, is following that. And I believe, and Clif, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, if you think I'm wrong, I believe that the reason why Europe is getting this cold weather is because the magnetic North Pole is moving closer to them, and over here on this side, here in Michigan, we haven't had any snow. We've had one day at 0 degrees, and usually we have a month at a time at 0 degrees. So obviously something is going on. Something really weird is going on. And I thought we'd get that out of the way first to clear that up, because a lot of people have been asking me about that, and a lot of people have had a lot of questions. So I'm going to bring Clif in. Clif, take it away.
Okay, about the issue of the magnetic pole and the ice cap is linked only within the data for the last 100,000 years. If we look at cycles that are longer than that, we're not necessarily sure that that's the case. We can't, from my viewpoint, what's going on in Europe makes a lot of sense at the moment, as does the weather that's striking the west coast of the U.S. as well as the west coast of England, Ireland, France, Portugal, northern Africa, and northern South America. And it has to do with the material that's on my site at Half Past Human. If you go over to the right-hand side of the site and look way down there, you'll find stuff about the doom ain't what it used to be in 2012. And this relates to Dr. Bhatt, B-H-A-T. And he is a fellow out of India that came up with some really interesting mathematics and a theory of the world, of the universe, that makes a lot of sense. And that theory is slowly proving itself to be true. The more data we know about, that we get that's factual from NASA, the more we can plug in values that fit Dr. Bhatt's model. So here's what's happening with the planet Earth. And this is going to be really interesting because I'm going to have to do this without pictures. But basically, everybody thinks that we are rotating around the middle of the sun, and that we go whipping around the middle of the sun the way a hula hoop goes around a human. And
Clif, let me interrupt you just for a second. Do you have graphics or anything at your website? Because we've got that up
I have
on the
some
screen.
graphics, and there's all kinds of graphics at Dr. Bhatt's site. So you can link from my site. There's a link to Dr. Bott's site and the theories and so on, and they show some of the graphics there. And basically what I'm going to describe, if you go and look at those graphics, is that the sun is really a comet, and we're not around the middle of it. We're being drugged behind the thing. And in the same way that a comet is projecting a coma around it, our sun has a coma that they call the heliosphere. And this heliosphere has gotten very dense these last years, and the Russians started warning us years ago, hey guys, there's dust out there or something that our sun's going to run into, and the heliosphere is changing. And indeed it has changed. And what happens in that change, none of us really thought about it ahead of time, was that any of the debris that's trailing behind the sun, i.e. the solar system, all the planets and us, is going to find itself being pushed inward towards the central core of the solar system. Bear in mind, we don't orbit around the middle of the sun. We orbit around what we think is the middle of the sun, but we're hanging back behind it in this spiral fashion. So really what's happening, if you think about it this way, is that the cone of the comet that is our sun is squeezing itself in a bit because it's going through a denser period of time and space. This means that our orbit, what we used to call our orbit, that is the spherical path that we transcribe through space behind our sun that has been previously limited by the conical size of the coma at which our sun was, or at which our planet was harmonically situated, that coma has shrunk. This has pushed us in closer to what we think of as the center of our orbit, the actual barycenter. So, but at the same time, in doing so, because it pushes us in, we don't go in a straight line, we go on an arc. And it is that arc that explains everything. Because the arc tells us that we're actually moving further away from the sun, even though the sun, physically, in terms of, no longer 93 million miles out, probably close to like 101 million miles or something like that at the point that we terminate on this arc. But at the same time that that's occurring, we're actually going in towards the hotter zone of our whole solar system. So we're going to find some interesting effects. The theoretical angle of the Earth relative to what we think of as our tilt relative to the zodiac, the fixed stars, will not change. But the climate and the weather will change as though the angle of the Earth had shifted. And that's what's going on right at the moment. That's why there's no real disruption in the position of the fixed stars unless you've got the ability to measure them down into the thousandths of a point of position. Then you might see some deviation. But beyond that, what's actually occurring is that we're coming in this gradual arc. All the planets are shifting. We just learned the other day that Venus is shifted, slowed down 6 minutes, 47 seconds in its orbit, in its presumed orbit, and it did that in a very short period of time. And all this stuff is all occurring in a very short period of time as we are squeezed by the sun going through this denser period of space. And in doing so, the angle of our apparent planet rotation relative to sunlight has changed, and so has our ability, or our apparent, and will be soon, geographic and magnetic poles. And so we're going to see the ice shift. I had thought, because of the linguistics, that it would hit in the U.S., that the U.S. would be suffering what Europe has now. The reason I thought that is because of the ambiguity of the place language that we get. Because so many of the places in the U.S. are named after European places, it's hard to say, London, New London, all of that kind of thing, Paris, New Paris. So and we just get Paris, we really can't tell. But the wedge component of that has played out. The ice has played out in Europe really the way that it should have relative to what's going on. But it is now pretty much proven Dr. Bott's position, as have some of the lunar anomalies that are starting to show. Both of these things should increase over time. So it would not surprise me to discover that the position of the seed vault in Norway at the edge of the Arctic Circle remains at the edge of the Arctic Circle, even though the position of the center of the Arctic Circle has arced around and will be moving now to the east and then south of that position. So it wouldn't surprise me to see that the middle of what we'll call the new Arctic might end up in the very top point of the mountain range that runs up along the river there, the Caucasus Mountains in Russia. That would mean that the Arctic Circle would extend over into parts of Europe, and we'd see a vast migration of the European population into Africa. This is what the powers that be have been planning for, by the way, and they've been doing everything they can to destroy the population base in Africa on the presumption that they'll have to move their population, meaning all the white population of Northern Europe, south as a result of the weather changes.
Okay.
Any of that makes sense? Any of that can you clarify?
It makes perfect sense. I'm actually reading the questions that are coming in, and they're coming in so fast I can barely keep up with them. Ladies, hold the questions for a little while, please. And I'm listening to what you're saying. I can picture it in my mind. The magnetic North Pole. Let me bring this map up again that I have here. I have an animated map right now of the jet stream around the world. And you can see, let me bring this up on the screen. Hold on a second, Clif. Right here where I'm drawing this circle, that's the United States right there, North America. And the magnetic North Pole used to be like right around in here where this red dot is. And it has shot across in this direction. And that's why the Europeans right over here are getting the brunt of this new ice age, because damn things moved.
And also we need to explain some of the complexity of that as well. I'd written some of this about the toroids going walkabout. Mm-hmm. And that's what has actually occurred. And we need to understand, the North Pole is not cold, the South Pole is not, they're not cold and covered with ice because they don't get much sun. That's a misnomer. People just are, they're taught that in academia, but that is not the true case of things. It is the magnetic component of that is really the tell all of this, because at the center of that magnetic pole is a place of lower, if you will, magnetic pressure than the rest of the planet, and it draws down from space magnetic vortices and connects our planet to the rest of our solar system through these vortex energies that are all swirling around that we think of as the magnetic filaments. Now there's a corresponding force that is at the equator that forces the magnetic lines apart, and it causes this fluctuation or a pulse, or very much a pulse. The magnetic lines move out and then come back in, causing a pulsing effect at the North and South Pole, which quite literally pumps down cold because space is cold. And so this is how you end up with the sudden cold air that freezes the mammoth chewing the daisies in the middle of, Jurassicville, Siberia, way back when. And we potentially will get that same level of effect, and this is the same sort of thing that was in that movie that Whitley Strieber and Art Bell wrote, that book about Day After Tomorrow, or whatever it was.
Yeah,
we get those kind of effects, but much more telling for us is going to be the continual shift of that arc, because it's going to lend a certain level of permanency to this, because we won't be tracing that arc back anytime soon. So we're looking at a level of climate change, even though our weather, extreme as it is still within a tolerable zone as it shifts itself around the planet. Some other things too, by the way, is I've discovered that we really shouldn't believe a lot of the data that's being promulgated as accurate for real-time atmospherics out of the various different agencies. I've noticed some incongruities in some of the 800 millibar and above data, so I don't necessarily trust some of the stuff they're telling us about the jet stream.
All right, this one is, the one that we're looking at right now is from SFSU, whoever the hell those people are. But they've got a pretty neat, let's see, the California Regional Weather Server, the Meteorology Department of the Department of Geosciences at San Francisco State University.
Yeah, and they may be working off of basically the pumped out data from a central area. So I don't know them specifically, but I do know that I've been running into various different kinds of data collisions as the feds try and control. I don't know why they care about this minutia, though. It's only nutters like me that really pay any attention to it.
It is bizarre, isn't it? That's one of the things that we want to talk about tonight. Is I just don't understand why they care. It's like, so what? We know that the weather's getting colder. Big deal. You know, your global warming thing didn't work out for you. So sorry.
Yeah.
So sorry. You know, sorry about your luck, Chuck. You know, the only thing that I can think, Cliff, is that it's this big push towards the green energy thing. That's the only thing that I can think.
There's got to be something back there. Yeah, I was thinking even more obscure, that there were people that were making climate-related bets relative to derivatives and stuff, and they were trying to rig the game, so to speak. There's a lot of these insurance companies that end up with this, you know, where they end up having to insure crops, and we're already seeing some of the damage already in 2012 as the various countries affected by the weather, Britain, Ireland, Western Europe, and eventually the Western U.S. have to deal with the shifts in the weather patterns and the impact on the food supply. Yeah. And the insurance companies are going to have to pick that up as well. But the powers that be, I think, have, I don't know, I think they spiral in too much, you know. In that sense, they may be less than human because they are too minutia-oriented and they just don't get the big picture.
Yeah, let me see here. I have it up here. Let's see. So far, 600 people have died so far during the cold snap. 80-plus deaths in Poland, 130 in Ukraine, hundreds in Russia. Let me see. 100, according to the Associated Press, 100,000 tons of fruit, vegetables, and meat products have rotted because they cannot reach market.
Yeah, it's going to get worse. I think from our data that we can see a little bit of relief for this as we move into March. The real problem for us is the discontinuity within the data can be read in the following way. The discontinuity could arise from the unceasing of the weather and the realization of that it's unceasing and the changes that that forces on the populations of the northern hemisphere planet-wide. And there's been I've had some discussions with George and a couple of other guys about how this would potentially play out. And imagine a situation where Europe expects the weather to change for the better at the end of February, which is their long-term weather forecast, and they get a long-term weather forecast at the end of February that says by the end of March it'll be twice as bad as it is now. And it's going to get a lot worse. And then in the first part of March, the weather forecast becomes even more dire as it continues to manifest. We could see a situation in which the release language globally could be focused on the climate shifting. If it shifts rapidly enough, it would correspond to the rise of the release language. The language is neither good nor bad itself. It's just merely release language as opposed to building tension language. And when it starts rolling in on the 10th, it doesn't really, there's no huge event, there's no giant upswing or anything like that, but what is the real conundrum about the whole thing is that it just keeps compounding, that every single day we just keep staying in this release language, as though whatever is the state of affairs that's causing us to be in release language just does not let up the way it has in the past. And that's why I use the word discontinuity, and I've been at great pains to tell everybody I don't know how things are going to work out, but it really looks like as we shade past the 10th of March, we get into a period of time from which we'll be able to look back and say, oh, no more business as it used to be. And that's the real problem. You know, you can imagine all kinds of horrific scenarios that would cause such a state of affairs. And to get right to the nitty-gritty of it in my mind here, the problem is the following. I am of the opinion that we're going into release language not because of a particular trigger or an event, but rather because we must for some reason. That universe has us going into the release language for some reason. Now, the reason is immaterial, but I think that the powers that be are aware that we're about to go into this period of release language, and that they know that there is a different flavor to the Kyrios of this time, and that they're in a position to where they want to change or control the release language as we go into it. And they think that because we're at this delicate period, they can do an Archduke Ferdinand and ignite a World War III the way they did World War I. That's my opinion.
This is, folks, we've come to a bizarre intersection right here at the beginning. Yay.
Sorry about that. Just the
No,
way it works out.
that's quite all right, because Cliff, you have just said exactly what our guest from last Friday, C.K. Quarterman, said. With you two have reached the exact same conclusion from two different directions. CK is going from the direction of what we're dealing with. The power behind the powers that be are what he calls the fallen angels, the Nephilim, if you will. And you are saying basically the same thing, but you're coming from more of a universal direction. You're both coming to the same point, that for some reason right now is the time when all this evil is just going to pop out.
I think so, and that's why I've been at great pains to try and get out what I could in the articles without saying, without giving people the wrong impression. The real problem is that we've got to be very careful about this because of the ambiguity of language. And we have release language coming, and that is no guarantee that New World Order wins. It is no guarantee that there's a third great war involving nukes. There's no guarantee that any of the greater disasters that we can imagine will materialize. But I can guarantee you one thing. There is a small group of people on the planet desperately trying to engineer just such an outcome. So that one guarantee we have, there's a bunch of ruthless bastards out there trying to do us all in. They're scum. I don't think they really recognize that they're scum. Some of them may, but we have to understand that our pond is becoming occluded with this stuff, and that we're at a point of change, because all things run in cycles. In spite of the fact that we in the Western world have lived in a growth model that presumed a never-ending wedge upward, we have to recognize that the universe is cyclic. And when the pond becomes so filled with scum that it crowds itself out, a big portion of it dies off, the ecosystem changes, it goes from tropic to eutrophic and so on, and you get an entirely different environment. We are at such a crux right now. I've got astro friends all over that will tell you it's because of, one of these big long-range planets going around and hassling Mars, or another planet over there doing such and so with Venus, and this kind of thing. And from their viewpoint and their methodology, I'm sure they're quite correct in being as intuitive in reading their data sources as I am, and arriving at the same conclusion, that for whatever reason, this time is just different.
Yes, it's Boris and John DiNardo, we have him on a lot, L.A. Marzulli, all of these guys, and myself to some extent, we all look at the 3,600 year cycle. Every 3,600 years something like this happens on this planet. It's like clockwork every 3,600 years, and it's the most bizarre thing. But I am being screamed at by my producers to get some of these questions in, and they relate to what you have been just discussing here for the past couple of minutes. Are you ready for a few questions?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Here's question one from Pink Dove. Can it be explained why there hasn't been another shape report from this day forward? And hang on that one. Here's another one from Derek. Is the WebBot software detecting future events itself, or rather sensing upcoming changes in linguistic patterns? And the third question that relates to this is, what is the rate of drop-off in the data March through July? A steep curve down at the start, linear, or a steep curve down at the end?
I don't know if they're talking about the data drop-off relative to the data gap, or whether they're talking about the release language. This is relative to the third question.
I believe it's the data gap, is what it looks like to me.
It's actually, okay, the gap it's a gap at the end in 2013, but it's more like a Swiss cheese. It's more like a cheese being eaten by bacteria and holes appearing over time. And the hole patterns are inconsistent, so there's not a steep drop-off. I've never charted it relative to a vertical line chart, so I don't have that kind of thing to compare. I only have a scatter graph image in terms of how it appears. We have a clumping in the middle of the summer of a whole bunch of holes, and then it trails off through to 2013. The data does not read future events. There's no way the software could know anything. The idea of artificial intelligence or a computer being able to sense anything would depend on a sensory apparatus that was specifically tuned to pick up certain frequencies and that kind of thing. Our software picks up the changes in language currently that reflect the human antenna out there running around as they pick up psychic impressions of the future, and it leaks out of their fingers because they just don't know what else to do with it. They've got it in their head and it's got to come out. Basically is our operating theory, is that you've got 7 billion people on this planet that are running around standing waves, getting impressions from the future. Most of them don't know that's what's going on, but yet it must express itself, and so they use various changes in language, and we pick up on that. The reason we don't have a shape report out has to do with my guy Igor supporting his wife in her career objective, and they had to relocate, so all the servers had to be taken down and moved with him, because I don't want them here because they're too noisy.
Ha!
so and he'll set them up in a month. Maybe around the end of March when he's relocated, we'll get them set up, and then we'll get connected into the data stream. I've got all kinds of other stuff going on at the moment, and I'd been analyzing some stored long-term data that I'd had here, and I wanted to do different things with this time, so I wasn't really concerned about it. And also I figured that March may make it moot.
Yes, that's true. And I know what he's talking about, folks, because right over here is the video server. Right here is the audio server. Right here is my communication server, and right over here is the internet server.
And where's your air conditioner?
We're located on the lower level of the house, which is cold year-round, so we don't really need
no worries. Yeah.
No worries. We don't need any air conditioning down here at all. Now, I think we've covered the planetary discontinuity. Discontinuity. Yes. I have trouble pronouncing words sometimes. I've got it up on the screen for the people on the video site. It's basically torn right from your website.
That's fine.
What else can you tell us about what this thing that's coming up here? The last 26 days of life. This is the one that you came out with.
Yeah, this is the nasty one. This is where the powers that be are desperate to gin up this war. They've got a real problem on their hands, as is evidenced by things that are occurring this week. We've already seen the beginning of this mass wave of resignations. It's just going to keep on and on and on, and pretty soon you'll see a secondary wave where a guy gets in, takes the job, gets 2 or 3 days under his belt looking at the data, and then he quits.
You mean
and
the
then
bankers?
you'll know things are really starting to stink to high heaven. And I'm talking about CEOs and CFOs, chief financial officers especially. Watch them. Don't care so much about the CEOs, but watch the people who understand how the money is flowing and how quickly they're abandoning ship. But we're also getting the politicos jumping ship, and a bunch of the other people are starting to bail at this point. Now, the powers that be and the officialdom face a problem. The systems that run this planet are corrupt, and they have reached the limit of their ability to continue. They cannot be fixed. It's not that they won't be fixed, it's simply that they cannot. We've had several thousand examples of paper currencies going bad on this planet that go all the way back to the 5th century China and one of the first paper currency experiments there. They always die. We're in one of those periods right now, and the powers that be have rigged it all so that everything's connected to the dollar, and so they're going to kill off a lot of the other currencies on the planet as the dollar dies as well. We know that this will occur. We think it'll occur with blinding speed as a result of these derivatives going bluey. And I'm of the opinion that events in the building tension period, the last of it here, in between March 2nd and March 9th. Now bear in mind something. Those dates are predicated on a summation of our immediacy and our short-term data, but they are volumetrically dominated hugely by the immediacy data, so they will only have a leeway of 3 days plus or minus. And March 2nd is the earliest that they could occur. So our data really picked the day of March 5, but I have a tendency to think that it's reading a little bit behind at the moment, so I used its 3-day lead time and said that it could not occur before March 2nd, and the end of this period is the 11th, and so 3-day lead time would be the 14th of March at the absolute far end. However, if I'm correct, we'll see events start picking up on March 2nd economically, and we'll know that, okay, they're going to have a crescendo here on 8th or 9th. They'll only last about 6 or 8 days, and then we're going to flip into release language when those events have run their course in the building tension plateau. Now, I suspect, if we're lucky, we'll have a giant economic crash like people have never seen before creep up on us, and it suddenly, it dawns on us over a period of days, and that's all we'll ever discuss for the next 30 or 40 years.
Right.
That sort of a thing. But the powers that be at the moment, knowing that we're going to go into release language, have an opportunity to trigger that release language, capture it, and redirect it. So you'll note that William Cooper was on his ham radio on September 11th, and for the next 2 days, as the September 11th scenario was playing out, and he was giving on the shortwave, he was providing blow-by-blow refutation to everything that was being put out by the spin machines, and they killed him. They only could let it go 2 days, and they killed him. And so there's others that have found themselves in that same situation relative to trying to stem the flow that the powers that be want the language to go into. Now, what I've discovered, though, is that I've got a direct correlation between building tension periods that go back to 1997 when I first started doing this data, and the powers that be and their spin machines. So I know that when we go into release language, there is not a possibility for the spin machines to continue to control the human race anymore. The dialectic or the dialogue that will become planetary at that point won't be controlled by the Communist News Network or the Fake It News Network or any of these guys that are under the control of Rupert Murdoch and his ilk. Why that can change is speculation, but the data strongly shouts that it does so change.
That's interesting. It's almost like they can spin to a certain point, and then people stop and say, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Wait a minute, you idiots!"
And that's our risk. That's our danger, because at that point, I've always maintained they can't let Israel attack Iran until the economy crashes. They wouldn't let it go until the dollar was certain to be dead, because that would kill the dollar. I've also maintained that it would be difficult for Iraq to attack, or for Israel to attack Iran alone, and that's the real issue. If we can keep the United States out of these United States out of the Israeli provocation against Iran, then there is a potential that the whole thing can fizzle away within March. But we're going to see a lot of activity as they attempt over these next few days to get the emotional buy-in that will allow them to do the attack. Now, I'm still maintaining that if they do, the outcome is going to be just absolutely horrific, and they're doing it in part to seal the fate in this giant horrific execution style of the people that live in the country that we call Israel, and that they've decided that these people that live there are going to be one of their satanic mass ritual death sacrifice things. And that's what the Super Bowl satanic ritual was all about with Madonna.
Oh, God, that was horrible.
And if you ever want to really see that and understand what's going on, watch it on YouTube and turn the sound off. Don't listen to the music, and just watch the ritual gestures and actions. And especially if you've got your handy-dandy guide to Masonic initiation rituals, it tells a whole story there. And you'll note that she was on for 13 minutes, that actually it was slightly less than that, and if you check that latitude, you'll find it goes to Jerusalem, blah, 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 blah. And so it was all part of this whole pointing of the upcoming event. And of course, they have to have the sacrifice, and that's why we have the dead Whitney Houston and all the questions around her death, etc. And so, you know, the whole thing is basically coming out right now. And I think they're uncertain. I think they don't know how it's going to be received, and there is a level of uncertainty about this, but they're bound to push through. The only question is, will they push it through all the way? Will they be able to get enough of a buy-in from the sheeple? Because they need that emotional weight to actually go and do it.
You know, and I think with the sheeple, and we've got a lot of questions here, so I'm going to get the questions in just a second.
Sure.
I think with the sheeple is the problem is they've got them so brainwashed, so immune, so dulled in their senses that, you know, they could jump up and down and say the Martians are landing, and they just say, okay, well, what's on American Idol tonight? I think that's part of it. I think they've gone overboard on it.
Yeah, I don't know that that's true anymore, though.
You don't?
There's a lot of people that I meet that are unaware, but I'm actually shocked at the number of people that I just run into in my infrequent out and abouts in my local community, where I run into people that, you know, they get it, or at least a little bit of it. So I actually think that, you know, big changes like, you know, a new North Pole and the changing of the Arctic Circle and this kind of thing, the universe basically may come on up and slap us upside the head, and a big chunk of the sheeple may decide they're going to get it and not die.
Well, that's a good thing.
That would be, but of course, bear in mind, everybody, that this is part of what release language is about all of the sheeple waking up and saying, you know, basically, oh my God, what's going on? Help me out here. And then everybody having this, you know, big gab fest as everybody has to get educated and tell everybody else about how it all worked out, and we have to sort it all out, and it takes decades. Look how long we've been suppressed as a species. I would imagine that a corresponding period of time would be required. You know, 1/10, 1/4, 1/2 of that period of time would be required for all of us to get through the reconciliation process of what we had been told was our history turns out to be totally bogus, and so on, as we rebuild all of this.
So that means that our responsibilities here as the educators of all of these people is going to become even more important, and it seems to me that they're going to be more likely to try to silence us.
That is a paranoia that has afflicted many of us in the Wujo, and it is particularly high at the moment because of the things that are going on at the moment.
Right.
And the paranoia is not unfounded.
Yeah, exactly. I was hoping you'd say that. Okay, we have some questions here. Let me see here. We have a question from Reflect on somebody. Here's a question for Clif. What do you think about the FBI shutting down their servers on Purim/March 8th?
It's a weird coincidence. It's really strange. I don't buy any of the supposed logic to what they're spewing out, because there's 18 dozen different technical ways to accomplish what they want without inconveniencing anyone, and do it all in the background and no one would not know about it. And also the whole fact that they announced it is weird.
Yeah.
You know, so no, I don't buy it. It's suspicious. I have no alternatives to offer as to why they might be doing it, because I don't know their intent. But I do know that when you take electronic things down, a lot of times they don't want to come back up.
Yes,
I've gone through that with servers, as have you, I'm sure.
Oh, many times. I've had computers that I ain't
the
shutting it off.
3-day nightmares getting that particular version of Unix that I hate the 3 letters of it to get there and sit well, that kind of thing. And you're 72 solid hours trying to get your servers going. That's the sort of thing that IT dreads, is these politically motivated changes. Having been in the IT industry for years, I don't buy any of the language coming out of the FBI relative to this particular issue on the 8th. We do have the data gap coming up. It starts as holes. If we start losing big chunks, it's like, well, I was told back in January that by certain individuals that I would be out of business in March because I wouldn't be able to get at the data because they would clamp down the control. Right. Whether or not SOPA and PIPA were activated, it would happen. And apparently, maybe that's the case.
Could very well be. In fact, that's That's one of the questions that I was going to ask you at some point tonight. Somebody had told me, and this is a rumor that I heard, I don't remember where, and you just answered it, is that there won't be any more shape reports, and Clif High is going to stop doing radio interviews. And I'm like, well, I don't know about that, but I figured I'd ask you straight up, is that true? Are you going to stop doing radio interviews, and are the shape reports done?
If we can't get data, they certainly are.
Okay.
And so it's not an issue of delivery, that kind of thing. Everybody says, oh, well, you can always just mail it to me. It's like, no, guys.
You don't understand. There's no information there to give you.
Correct. And
what
after
you
that,
make
I
it
don't
up?
have a whole lot to say, so yeah, I'm not going to give interviews. I'm going to go out sailing my boat, or, go and take on the lizards as they come out of their hidey holes, whatever seems appropriate.
Yes, and, we got so many questions. I'm going to get to some questions. In fact, the next question that I'm going to ask is great because I get to play my favorite audio file once more. Let me see here. Okay, this comes from Expando Mind. What does Clif think about all the recent vibration sounds different populations are hearing and feeling? And I'm going to go ahead and play one of those sounds now so we can all hear what he is talking about. Stand by, here it comes. We go. That's either the war of the world starting or something else is going on. Clif, what's your opinion on that?
I actually think that particular recording may be a fake. It seems to have elements of the musical instruments involved, a synthesizer. The real sounds, I've actually spoken with 3 people that have heard them. One person contacted me, and then I contacted 2 other people. In all 3 cases, the trumpet noise was highly overrated. It really didn't exist per se. Also, there were a bunch of discrepancies there. The 2 guys were in the Canadian Rockies when they heard it, and the one guy said he actually felt it coming up from his through the soles of his feet before he heard it, and you can't tell where it's coming from. It was quite odd, and all 3 people reported that there was no rustling of the trees, there was no noise from the grasses coming, so the sound that was reaching them was not in any way a large enough vibration source to disturb the air environment in which they were. 2 of the people were in a calm environment, one was in a noisy environment, wind-wise, when this occurred. In all 3 cases, they said what really was disconcerting was not being able to hear where the source was, and this the one guy who was in the noisy environment where there was wind all around, he was actually close to a coast, and so there was the surf noise in the background. He said there was a distinct edge to the sound, not in terms of dimensionally where it was coming from, but harmonically. And this guy is a musician, so he ought to know. He said he could distinctly hear the edge of the noise, whatever that really means, separate from the surf noise. And he said so he knew that it was not originating in the water, and he suspected that it was actually coming out of the ground from where he was. And he was on a rocky cliff at the time as well. The 2 people in Canada were in hiking in a mountain that's very heavily granite. And the other person was down in Texas over salt domes. So they were all around geologic kinds of things. So I suspect that the noise could have one of 2 large solar system influences could be causing this, and basically it all comes back to the sun and squeezing us closer to its central heat output anyway. But could be the Earth expanding and the expansion noise being driven out through all the granite outcroppings everywhere in a piezoelectric fashion. And that's why we can't tell where it's coming from. Or it could be that the atmosphere has been turned into basically a giant drum, and we're getting a drumming effect that is causing the sounds. The drum is not causing anything from anything physical striking the atmosphere, but from the energy that's passing through the expanded atmospheric pressures. As the Earth expands, we're going to get the atmosphere expanding, not in terms of its depth over the planet, which is like 7 miles, but rather, in fact, the atmosphere will thin a bit, and that's why we're seeing Venus and some of the other planets being extra sparkly and extra bright, is because the atmosphere is thinning as the planet around it is, underneath it is expanding and pushing itself out. It's sort of making the atmosphere bulge out a little bit, which thins it. Hopefully it will refresh and go back to 7 miles thickness later on. But as a result of that, we have a meniscus forming that forms a tympanic layer from which we can get sounds like this. And they're reacting to the high energy particles from the sun.
Okay. That's as good as an explanation as I heard from anybody else, that's for sure. And it makes all the sense in the world when you consider the expanding planet theory. I mean, that's...
And we also, by the way, we also know that there's an electrical or an energetic component to this, because the guy in Canada swears that the noise that ended up on his camera that was recorded was not what he and his buddy heard.
Right. I have also read that. Sticking with this type of question, we have a fellow by the name of Johnny. And he is wondering if you have any thoughts on the massive monolith showing up for the past 2 years on the SDO Eve soft X-ray cam that's been parked in synchronous orbit over southwestern Earth facing the side of the sun. Or have you even heard of that? That's
yeah, I have. And the problem is we can't tell if it's a digital artifact or if it's a software artifact. Because we are not allowed at the source data, we can only speculate so far. So if it could be shown that it was not an artifact of the software post-processing, then I would say, okay, there's something up there, and we really need to think about this. But until then, I've seen so many software artifacts in my decades in the software business. Until we can get that out of the loop, I just don't bother to put any energy into it.
Right, gotcha. I'm much the same way. Let's do 2 more of these celestial type of questions, and I think they're pretty good ones. Divine Roots wants to know about your thoughts on the 9.2 earthquake pulse emittance from the Earth, and Bay 2004 wants to know about the new particle from the sun that's changing the C14 according to Stanford University. And I think that second one is very interesting, because my understanding of this is that it changes the carbon dating system that they've been using.
Correct. And if you'll go to Half Past Human and look way down at the bottom on the right-hand side in the column there, you'll see an article I wrote a long time ago, geez, I mean literally years ago, I think, about carbon and its decay rate not being sustainable from cycle to cycle, therefore it's only good within any given cycle. I think that those cycles relate to the 11,000 year, more or less, solar cycles, and so it's good within that 11,000 year, but beyond that it's questionable. And that, I don't think it's a particle that's changing the decay rates. It's a new form of energy that we're not able to actually measure accurately. Bear in mind, I don't think any particles actually exist in universe. They're just an illusion of our really simple minds and our sensory apparatus not being able to perceive the universe as it truly is, which is pulsations of energy. And so we get tricked into thinking that particles exist. Now, it makes it a lot easier to postulate these changes if we think of them as energy also, because basically what's going on is higher grades and frequencies, vibrational frequencies of energy are coming from the sun, and they're altering what we perceive as the standing waves that we call the atoms. And one of the standing waves that we called carbon had various different flavors of that carbon. One of them is carbon-12, which is our most common, really want to bind with you kind of stuff, and that's the carbon you would find in wood and this sort of thing. And then we have carbon-14, and then we have other carbons in there, and the issue is the decay of carbon as a mildly radioactive stuff And so you would be able to say, oh, this wood is decayed this long because there's only this amount of the carbon-14 in it, which is the radioactive carbon. And we know that it decays at a certain rate, and when this tree was growing, it had 12 of these carbon-14s, and now it's only got 6, so we know that it's been decaying, 1,000 years, that kind of thing. And it's accurate within the cycle, but beyond that, it is a very interesting effect that we're seeing that come out now, because the higher energy frequencies from the sun can be postulated according to Dr. Bott's model to affect all different, or rather, to affect all of material reality around us. And it won't simply be the carbon atom that is going to respond this way. And bear in mind, we got some of them atoms in us.
Right.
So
now, do you think that this is what's going to be going on in 2012? These increased unknown particles from the sun are going to begin affecting us as well as the Earth, and that's what
unknown energies. Correct. That's exactly the case. And I've been warning about this as the sun disease since 1998. And the more we're aware of it, the more we treat it in an appropriate fashion, the more we as conscious beings can come through it consciously. And that's the big issue. If you look at that article on the soliluniuses on my site, basically what's going to happen is lots of energies are going to come from the sun. Let's not call them particles, let's call them energies. These energies are going to strike our standing energy waves that we call our bodies, and our various atoms are going to respond in ways that are unpredictable and unknown to us, and we're going to all feel really, really, really wonky. Now, those of us that realize the wonkiness is from the sun and the whole universe are going to be able to say, okay, I'm going to chill out now and not go over there and take that man's head off with an axe. It's not his fault, blah, blah, blah. I'm just feeling wonky from the sun. The problem is there are going to be a whole lot of sheeple that are going to feel really, really, really wonky. They're going to get really angry and frustrated and afraid, and they're going to respond out of that fear complex because they know of no other way to deal with this. And this is the real problem we face now. Let's take a little diversion here from the celestial, and let's go into consciousness and down to the size of the mote. And let's consider for a second that I've seen recently an Alex Jones rant when he was going off about how the powers that be are taking DMT to commune with the entities on the other side of the mind veil there to get instructions on how to do their nefarious work. And Alex was very upset about the thought even that the powers that be would take this DMT drug and go off and commune with these things. It could be demons or who knows what. He's just very afraid of it all, and we shouldn't be doing this. And that's part of the problem. That rant represents the single state mind, and the problem with the single state mind is that when it is suddenly thrown out of that single state and doesn't know why, it's going to cast around for any number of reasons and will settle on the first one that seems to make sense and will react thereupon. Having done counseling for many people taking drugs, you basically have to understand that when this hits them, they are not going to know that they're under the influence of mind-altering energies from the sun, and they should just sit down and let it pass. And our problem is that it's going to affect a huge chunk of the planet at any given point in time. A lot of these people are going to be irrational, and if they were just told, sit down, shut up, and it'll pass. But they're not. They're going to say, oh no, I've got this idea in my head, I'd better go push that button before the other guys nuke us, I'd better nuke them. And that is a real concern.
That sounds like a really bizarre Star Trek episode that I saw once. And I will say this, and I've talked about this on the show before with a number of guests. I have actually noticed this myself, and it seems to happen the most when there is an electromagnetic storm as opposed to an X-ray storm coming from the sun. I have experienced this at the store. I have gone there and I have felt just like on edge, like on pins and needles, like I'm ready to just pop somebody. But I recognize it, I get it under control, and I observe the people when I go out to the grocery store or something, and people are just absolutely bonkers. They're like it's almost like a riot, a controlled riot.
Right. It's like the Santa Ana winds in Southern California. I've lived through those. I've also lived through the Scirocco winds when I was in Europe, in Germany. These are high, positively charged particle winds that bring in angry, irritable feelings because our brains are not intended to operate with a lot of high positive charged particles crossing the blood-brain barrier. And then we can get into whether or not the Rh negative of the elites responds the same way as the Rh positive blood, which is 85% of humanity, or not. But basically what's going to come down to it is this. Anybody who's ever gone to the seashore and felt really good and scarfed down a giant breakfast and it was the best tasting breakfast ever and everything, you're responding to the negative energy, negative ion particles that are generated by the waves crashing against the sand and the friction with the air there. Same thing occurs in the high altitude of the mountains for another reason, because the atmosphere is thin there and the high energy particles bring down more negative ions, and it makes you feel good. Now, up to a certain point. You can get a negative ion generator and put it in your house and you're great, but then you'll discover, 2 days later, geez, you can't sleep, you're gnawing your teeth, you're chattering, you've just got so much energy, all of your nerves are tingling, and you can literally cross from a metabolizing of the negative energies into a catabolic state relative to the negative energy. And this has to do with the change in these particles in your bloodstream called catecholamines. And they react in this odd way to negative energy particles. And they make you tense. The hair on the skin starts getting tense in your shoulders. If you're male, you get that testosterone feeling where you just want to hit something, you don't know why, you're just irritated and so on. And that's occurring all through this year and into the early part of 2013 before it starts to slack off a bit. And that may be May or even June of 2013. It's hard to say from where we're at now. The powers that be are censoring this information. I think I don't know if they know it and they don't want to tell us, or if they don't understand it would be better to let us know, or if they're just stupid, clever but stupid. But we need not go down this road of a horrible conflagration just because these solar particles are coming in and zinging through our brains and making us feel a little weird.
Well, and don't forget, all these military people, the people in the Middle East, they're all feeling it too. They don't get it, and they just want to lash out at somebody, and bingo bango, we got World War III and mushroom clouds all over the place.
And get this, too. Look at what Islam is. Islam is the largest religion on the planet with the strictest rules for the largest population relative to single-state mind. They won't have, the Islamic religion will not have you alter the state of your mind at all because it's a control mechanism. All religions are control operations against your mind. Islam doesn't want you to alter the state of your mind, because as a religion it would lose control if you were in some other state than the state it controls. Same with all religions. That's why there's the prohibition against drinking or drug use, etc., etc. And that's why the Catholic Church controls drinking and forces it into the binge thing from which it can retrieve the guilt and go into the next state of control with you. So they've adopted to it that way. Islam, on the other hand, is kind of like the military. The military doesn't want you out there doing drugs and learning other state kind of things. They want you to conform to the state of mind they want you to have. So unfortunately, here we have the military and the single mind state worshipping form of Islam. And both of those groups are going to get hit by a sudden change in the state of their ability to think. Their consciousness is going to change underneath them. So, it's going to be a very interesting time. The effects are going to be not very subtle, but I don't know how the single-state mind will perceive them. And there are other factors as well. I've got a metal roof, for instance, so the metal roof may indeed limit some of my exposure to this. People that work and spend a lot of their times in big concrete buildings may be less exposed. People in battleships might be less exposed. People out, shopping in markets might get a whole lot more exposure, and so we may see that the effects are not ubiquitous. But it really seems that the data is suggesting that the first large-scale visible part of the sun disease will be occurring after March 10th as part of the going into the release language, which is really what gives me hope. It could be that there's enough overwhelming conditions facing us as humanity that we don't push those buttons, that we don't succumb to the going soliluniasis on ourselves.
Okay, the next question. And we're just going to go with the questions here because there's like a million. There's a million people out there, Clif. They're just They're throwing questions at me like you wouldn't believe. And this one is one of my favorites because I saw this gentleman on a 3-hour special one day, and I was completely smitten with this guy. What is your opinion? This comes from First Timer 98978. What is your opinion of Ray Kurzweil's technological in reference to a utopian society being reached the closer we reach the point of singularity? Or does Clif see Ray Kurzweil's theory as erroneous because the model will break down due to the foreseen disasters happening in the near future? I have a tendency to go with the second part of that question.
That would tend to presuppose the view of like a Mad Max scenario. And what everybody fails to understand is that humans are really creative. And we're very, there's lots of us that just love to tinker and build and all this kind of stuff. So as stuff is falling apart around us, we're in the process of creating and building that which will take its place. There is no big Armageddon kind of a gap in my view of things. There need not be. Let me put it that way. So Kurzweil's idea of the singularity I find to be disturbing on a bunch of different levels, but not necessarily wrong. And it can coexist quite peacefully with all of the huge changes we've got because of this whole issue of complexity. Okay, so here we go. All right. Every 22 trillion times a second, a pulse comes from the center of the universe and goes to the center of every galaxy instantaneously. From there, it goes to the center of every single star and object in that galaxy instantaneously because it travels beyond time. This happens 22 trillion times a second. Those 22 trillion times a second pulses of energy travel and eventually become waves, which eventually crash into each other and form standing waves because they crash into each other in the same spot over and over and over again. And if this happens at a high enough level of complexity with enough of these waves, life is formed, as is matter. And we get both of those forming, and we're in that right now, what I call the materium, that where matter exists in our senses, in our consciousness. It doesn't exist per se, it only exists in our consciousness. Because bear in mind, we are standing waves of complexity created by these 22 trillion collisions, pulses coming out, causing all these collisions on a second-by-second level. And our brains are only operating at 30 frames a second if you're lucky, or you're sitting there drinking coffee trying to wake up. Maybe you're only clicking along at 5 frames a second. So it seems like it's real to us. But because we are this way, because we're in a vibratory universe of this kind of a nature, we can get to, and in fact, we can derive from the view of Ethereum a purpose for universe that relates to complexity. That may not be its only purpose, and it may be a misreading of the purpose, but complexity exists. As complexity increases, we get to the point where there's going to be compounding effects, and I think that's what 2012 is all about. I think there's a lot of other issues with 2012, but I think that the Kurzweil's approach to the singularity is a different way of stating that we will reach a complexity compounding threshold. And this is kind of like the compounding interest deal, right? Where it keeps going and all of a sudden you're making a little bit of money, and then the money starts really growing and it gets a little bit better and so on. We're in a situation where not only will the interest itself compound in the form of complexity, but the rate of interest will start compounding itself and start growing itself astronomically as complexity itself increases. This also relates us back to Kalaman's view, John Kalaman's view of the increasing order of complexity through universe that he found represented on the stellae in the Palenque in Maya country. And his idea was that we would reach this threshold on October 28th, and we'd cross this threshold, and we would reach a universal understanding, or galactic, or one of the two words. And basically, he's also saying the same thing. I'm saying that a complexity threshold is going to occur when standing waves that are us change to the point, and we're seeing it now, our carbon is changing in our bodies as we're sitting here discoursing on this, but we'll see a complexity wave compound on itself, come crashing in on itself, and we will become galactic. And so the idea that we could live in a feudal society, or neo-feudalism, that wishes to be imposed on us by officialdom is ludicrous. What they are trying to do is to oppose the complexity increase, the universe is shoveling down our throats. Anybody who is saying that, oh, well, we're going to go back to a simpler way of life, let's all be conservatives and go worship the ancient God of our father and go and herd the sheep in the homespun wool and all of that kind of stuff. Hey, people, you're going against the harmony of universe. Universe wants us to be more complex. It wants us to get harmonious with that. That's what's occurring. And unfortunately, it is bringing a lot of mental distress to those people that can't get behind the idea that complexity continues to increase, will continue to increase, and in fact, its rate of increase is going to start increasing. And we're all going to become shockwave riders. And so we're going to have to exist in a world that is unlike anything that existed for our ancestors. And to a certain extent, it is very much like our great-grandchildren will have, or even further down the line, because unlike previous generations where we could say, oh, well, the universe is going to be more complex now for my great-grandchildren than it is for me, in a certain sense that won't be true, because we will have crossed a complexity threshold and they will have a greater depth of complexity, but not more of it.
Right. So you think Kurzweil is right about us reaching the I want to say a technological plateau where the technology will increase at such a rapid rate that it'll essentially be a utopia? I mean, because he's talking about we're right on the cusp of being able to live 150 years with the medical technology.
Yeah, but that doesn't make it a utopia. I do understand what he's saying.
Okay.
And his viewpoint is expressed well, but I think it does not take into account the nasty, rotten, evil bastards that are trying to rule and destroy us all. And if they weren't here, I would say yes, he would be quite correct. We're about to reach a point where factories will be able to be entirely run by themselves, place their orders for raw material, and deposit the finished results on the loading dock without humans having to be involved other than the programming of the factory to start with. And pretty soon we'll program machines that will in turn program the factories, and the complexity will get to that order. And then pretty soon we'll have a neural net where you'll be able to just, talk to it and describe what you want, and it'll help you work out the mechanistic component of getting that done. This is going to create a potential for non-scarcity and deflation like nobody has ever seen. Because if there's no humans involved in the production of goods, your cost of labor disappears. And so deflation enters into it. But at the same time, it frees up millions of humans for some other purpose. But let me tell you, you'd better have a purpose for them or you're going to get a lot of trouble. And we're at the point where we don't yet have any leadership from the evil, rotten bastards at the top that would pass for a moral approach as to how we're all going to live in this greater world of complexity, and what all of these people that used to do that kind of work that the factories are now able to do on their own should be doing with their time. And I've got many answers for that. It's just, blatantly obvious what we should be doing is to be very, very, very human. And so if you looked at a world in that kind of a way, Kurzweil's world, I would love to live there because we would have a factory and people would get, I don't know if they'd get money, but they would get kudos and energy from other people on the planet by being very good at being humans. So for instance, you'd have a really good singer and everybody would really like that singer, and just the way we do today, you'd get their music and you would appreciate their singing. Only it wouldn't be limited to that level of art. You could have somebody bake a really good pie, and because we would know enough about the molecular structure of material universe, and I actually think that we really ought to discuss the materium and some of the things coming there, but under those circumstances, you could have a woman or a man make a really good pie that could be sampled, and you would sample it in such a way that you could then replicate that sample into millions of kitchens everywhere, and everybody could taste that really good pie that night, and then everybody would send great energy to that pie baker. And so that would be the world we would live in, where we would be quintessentially human, and our humanness would be rewarded that way. Those things that humans are really good at would be rewarded, and we wouldn't have to be machines anymore. We wouldn't have to be cube farmed. We wouldn't have to be slaves on assembly lines, living our lives of misery. We wouldn't have to sign non-suicide agreements to work in an Apple factory in China. This kind of thing, that kind of a world can exist, but we've got a huge political hurdle in achieving it because the politicians And the evil, rotten bastards that pull their strings are not allowing us to design or envision that world. And we need to do that before we can live in it.
Right. That's pretty deep. That's an excellent answer. I grasped it because I've been living in the Ray Kurzweil universe for quite a while. But you folks need to, you guys need to look this guy up. I'll have a link to his website on the show page at some point. This guy's great. I mean, he invented the device where blind people can point like their cell phone at a sign, and it'll read the sign to them.
Yeah, fantastic, and that's just the kind of thing that we can all be doing when we get ourselves structured differently. And so it's, I've always maintained there is not a scarcity problem on the planet. It's an organization problem. We don't have an overpopulation problem. We could easily support another 3 or 4 billion people on this planet. We just have to organize ourselves better. We can produce more of everything than we need than has ever been possible before, and yet we're living in this stew that I hate to use the appropriate words, this septic tank that the powers that be are shoveling us into. And it has nothing to do with resources or any of this. When the economic system crashes in March and the pressures start really coming on everybody, we have to recognize not a single particle of food has left this planet. Not a single particle of oil has left this planet. Nothing changes. All that has happened is the illusion of control is disappearing at all levels, and that's going to put us into a big state, especially since we've got the sun beaming all these energies into us. Now, we can chill out, recognize what's going on, and react appropriately or not. And the real problem, of course, is how do we tell the sheeple ahead of time, and get ready to tell them, do not worry, you're experiencing a mind-altering effect from the sun. It will pass in a half an hour or so. Sit down, stop driving, that kind of thing.
Right. Sort of in the same vein as that, Shadow Angel wants to know about transcranial magnetic stimulation, and could it be replicated in nature and cause people to go haywire? Do you think that's something that we're seeing?
Yeah, the military is actually doing stuff that way too. No, I'm certain that's the case. That's exactly what's going on. Part of the problem is going to be that it's going to affect different portions of the population differently, because I think it has, I know that it has electromagnetic components that relate to the chemistry of as your body is expressing it. So for instance, in Ireland, they have a disease called hemochromatosis that relates to too much iron in the water, and it affects males terribly over there, and that's why you find the fighting Irish. And it's because they have too much iron in their blood, and they basically have a terminal blood disease, and as a part of the iron problem, it makes them very angry because of the effect it has as it crosses the brain-blood barrier. And so we'll see that maybe people with high iron, high copper components will react differently. And this gets us back to the blood types and the elites, because the elites are the blue bloods. It's not named blue blood just because they think blue is a neat color. It's named blue blood because they have a higher copper component in their blood because of this off-world, presumably, DNA that's been introduced into their particular bloodline. That's why they're so desperate to maintain the bloodline. But they are a higher cupric-based blood component, and this may also relate to the Rh negative component there, and so they may react to these energies differently.
Oh man, good Lord, there's so many pieces of this puzzle that are coming together tonight for me, because let's just try to stay on some of these questions, because we could go off on a tangent like you wouldn't believe
it's real
now
easy.
because of what you just said, because of the Nephilim and everything else, and their otherworldly and everything else. Let's get back and let me see. Okay, let's finish up the time that we have left for the show, and I'm sure that we could eat up this time pretty quick, talking about the governmental and societal changes that we're beginning to see. We've got a couple of questions here. Going back to the evil, dirty, rotten bastards. your reports have mentioned the bankster lawsuits, and it looks like there's some info coming out about a lawsuit that relates to the bonds that were seized on the Swiss border. And do enough of the linguistics fit some of the language that has come out so far to consider this as something that the webbot was talking about?
Yes, indeed. That is quite correct. We've met, I think, last time I ran it, it was in the high 20s, and I'm sure it's into the 30% now for that linguistic fulfillment in a number of languages, English among them. So that was the forecast. That is a hit for that forecast. Also, we need to note that this is a bleed-in, we call it, where one meme bleeds into another one. This is a bleed-in meme that leads directly into the damaged documents forecast in the last shape reports. The damaged documents is key because it relates to the derivatives. When the derivatives go, the derivatives are unlike any other bubble that has ever existed on our planet. All the way back to John Law, all the way back to the cotton silk bubbles and the early Chinese currencies. This is unlike any other bubble. And you say, oh, no, it's the same, it's just larger. There is one key difference. There is no underlying physical commodity supporting any of the derivatives. So we had a housing bubble, and it's going to take us years and years, decades to unwind out of this, because houses are big things, and there's things to deal with them. There's all kinds of paperwork and people involved and so on. Not so with derivatives. When derivatives go, they'll go overnight, and everything will change just like that. And there will be no recourse. We'll wake up one day and you'll think, what just happened? What did they say? And it will be because you won't be able to understand the magnitude with no underlying physical thing having occurred, right? It would be like all the houses in North America disappearing all overnight, and we're waking up, out in the cold with the rain, with your bed lying on the hard ground where your house used to be. That you would recognize as having been a huge monumental occurrence. You won't see that corresponding thing within the derivatives, but when the derivatives go, they'll affect your life a lot longer than the loss of your house.
That is actually something that I learned about way back last winter, because there was an author that wrote a book about this, and I can't remember the guy's name. I've got it recorded somewhere. He was actually, when Glenn Beck was back on television, he was actually on his show 72 Hours. And this guy seems to think that when they do this, they're going to do it on a Friday. And by Monday, the economy as you knew it is going to be gone.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know that it would take that long. Technically, it happens, literally from 1 minute to the next, because a lot of the derivatives will cascade out in milliseconds as the various machines come sputtering to a halt that are relating to them. But I would agree, and you'll wake up and it will just be over. Unlike the previous depression, when hard physical things had to be moved, taken, etc., there is this weird componentry to the whole digi world that it can disappear overnight, and you can just be standing around left saying, what happened? It's just like with Rumsfeld. He says, well, we lost $2.2 billion, and we don't know where it went. And you can ask, well, why don't you know where it went? Well, the problem is they don't know where it went. First off, they don't want to know where it went. But you can actually lose stuff digitally just because there's so much of it. And when we lose the stuff digitally this time on the derivatives, there's no recovery for those. There's no physical thing anywhere. And as we've seen with some of the moves in Ireland in terms of the foreclosures and the restatement of common law, I think that is the social change that's coming. And in fact, I think it's coming out of Greece, because we've seen a turn in the language that is really a key, and it came in the last probably 36 hours in terms of visibility. Bear in mind that no mainstream media anywhere on the planet is allowed to cover the situation in Greece as occurring on the streets. And there's tens of millions of people out there weekly, everybody coming out continuously in opposition to having a Goldman Sachs government shoved down their throat. And so they've gotten cohesion. Now they've got their slogan. Their slogan was something that we've been waiting for. It was one of my temporal markers. I didn't know what country it was going to arise from. We're seeing it in Greece, and it's sweeping through Greece fairly rapidly, so pretty soon you'll see it all over the planet, and there is a day coming here in the United States where after your Social Security is gone, after they've taken your 401k, when you're looking at $19 a gallon for gas, which all of that's happening this summer, and you'll stand up and you'll say in public, you will stand up there and you'll shout in a crowd, I am an Icelander, or we are all Icelanders. Because Iceland is the one that has the model. Throw the damn banks out. Let them fail, kick them out, seize what you can out of them, and start over. And that's what we have to do. And Greece has finally decided as a populace that they don't care what's going to result from it. They're not going to take a Goldman Sachs government being shoved down their throats. And so they've declared themselves to be Icelanders.
Now that is absolutely fascinating, Clif, because that is the people that make the most sense to me are the ones that have been saying all along, this bailout of the banks was stupid. It's a natural cycle to let businesses that are going to fail, let them fail. Yes, we'll go into a depression, but it's better to do it sooner rather than later. It's going to hurt for a while, but we'll get better that much quicker. The only thing they're doing is they're delaying the whole thing until it's going to hurt so bad.
Yeah, but they have a nefarious purpose for that. They're doing that to continue to be able to control us as we come through it and go into the war that they want to replace it, where they maintain control in the war, and then they get a boom going during the war, and they maintain control in the boom, and this kind of thing. However, they have reached the ability of that at a systemic level. Once we have identified that the 1% are claiming ownership on 99% of the planet, well, there's not a whole lot left for them to loot. And so at that point, I say the rest of us, all the rest of the 99% of us, should recognize that the old French farmer was correct. One day we will all eat the rich, and we should declare ourselves to be pirates and set about looting. You know, they stole from us and in with all of their organizations, and they never went to jail. There's been no one that's gone to jail for any of this fiasco. You know, we all know that 9/11 was a put-up job, and that there were people within our government that caused those 3,000 or 4,000 hapless souls to die, that Bush is guilty of murder. You know, these people are participating in all of this. It's all come out. It's becoming so much common knowledge that pretty soon you can talk to people on the street about it without having the instant denial syndrome show up, where the eyes glaze over and they say, nut job, and they run away from you. That is becoming less and less of an occurrence. In fact, it's so rare now that it's actually sort of shocking me to actually see somebody exhibit paradigm defense behavior by falling into that rut in their mind. So as this occurs, we're getting to the point where that social cohesion is coming out. Russia, as a communist Soviet Union, fell because people walked their dogs. And they saw other people walking their dogs. They knew why they were walking their dogs, because they couldn't stand to listen to the lies off the Soviet news. And they wondered, I wonder if, you know, Ivan over there, if he's walking his dog because he can't stand that news. Maybe I'll go and chat with him. And sure enough, pretty soon Ivan got to talking to Sergei, and they got Lenya involved. And everybody's saying, well, damn. Let's all just have us a revolution, since every one of us can't stand it, and there's only 12 of these people talking to us on the news. We can get rid of them fairly quick. Now, I'm waiting for two more major, now that we've had this We Are All Icelanders thing, I'm waiting for two more major temporal markers. And I suspect they'll fall in the next couple of weeks here. One of them is going to be really shocking to Americans at a core, and I'm not going to say anything about it because I don't want to give anybody ideas, and I don't want to be arrested by Homeland Security for doing that.
Okay.
But you'll know it when you see it, and I bet you, I'm willing to bet a little bit of money because I don't have much, but I bet you a broken down boat that it's going to appear before the 9th of March. And when it does, I'll be quite happy to send you an email and say, did you see it?
And is this what you were talking about in the article that you put out just a couple of days ago?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And I can't say what it is, because when it shows up, you'll know why.
That would be the mainstream media whores burst out truth attack.
Exactly.
It's up on the screen right now, folks. That one was I saw my wife was sitting upstairs last night before she went back to her mom's house, and I went upstairs last night, And she was sitting there and she was reading that. And I said, oh, God.
You're in for it now.
And I said,
Yep.
that's who's going to be on tomorrow night. She just looks at me and goes, you're insane.
But on the other hand, doesn't make me wrong.
No. No.
So here's the thing too. Some of the heaviest proponents of the single state mind will be the most visible breakdowns when the breakdowns occur. So just as we saw the journalist having their anomia moments where they're not really sure what they're saying and they're just babbling on with all these strange words and stuff over the past few years,
right.
we forecast that. In that same data set, in those same memes, are the forecast for the mainstream media horse burst out truth attack. So we'll see behavior that at its core has the same cause as what we saw there, and that is the single state mind being kicked out of that state and having no training or recourse to any other option. And I'm not trying to be superior or say that it's not going to bug me as much, but I've done psychedelic drugs. I know what it's like to be really out of your mind, and it's like when it happens again, it's like, okay, no, I haven't taken any drugs, but I recognize this feeling from before, so I'm not going to react to it. And a lot of people will be like that. They'll have that experience one way or another, schizophrenics or, fugue states or, drugs from the military, and they'll say, oh, yeah, I recognize this feeling. And they will be the sane ones in the crowds.
So, in other words, I want to make sure that everybody's clear on this, because this is, I believe, this is important enough, because this is coming up in the next couple of weeks, folks. This is going to be what Limbaugh calls the random act of journalism, except on a massive scale, where the media is going to sort of slap their foreheads and go, "Oh my God, what have we done?"
No, I wouldn't put it that way.
Okay.
But okay, my description of that component of it, without getting into the other part of the temporal marker that will shock you, okay, because this isn't the part that's going to shock you. This is the part I can talk about. So what I'm envisioning there is that, there's the stray extra energy from the sun that goes zinging through a building somewhere, let's just say it's in Atlanta or Washington, D.C., and it strikes one of these mainstream media people while they're on the air. And they get into one of these non-normal states in their mind as a result of the energetic component that's now intruding into their body. And they will react in for them, a non-appropriate manner. And will start talking about things that are really actually happening. And as opposed to being the controlled media press whore. And that's going to initiate a whole series of events because they won't have listened to this radio show. They won't know what's going on. A lot of the other mainstream reporters will then start commenting on it, and it will build up on its own momentum. But that's not the shocking temporal marker.
Okay. And so the people that are watching this show, or watching and listening to the show now, plus all the repeats, plus if Google allows us to have it up on YouTube, which I strongly doubt, and that's why we're starting something called SETV Tube, where we're going to do all of our own videos. But
there you go. Yep.
I think that the folks that are listening to this, they are going to be telling enough of their friends, and it will sort of be a cascading effect, where
I believe so.
Even if it's a minuscule percentage of the population, Clif, it's still better than 0% of the population knowing and recognizing that something's happening. Because all it takes is one person to talk to two people, and those two people talk to another two people, and it's your compounded interest theory again.
Yes, complexity increasing. And now we'll know, just like we'll know in a situation, we'll have the reporter have this truth attack. Mainstream media will blame it on, booze or drugs or who knows what, electroshock therapy gone bad or who knows. And in any event, though, the compounding effect will be out there ahead of the game. And it will slot right into the linguistics. And that we can talk about. There's no risk there. I'm not saying anything that's, going to upset the Homeland Security fascists on their daily patrols of our mental states.
Yes.
But it is just the beginning of this. And so we've got to really pay a lot of attention to this, planet-wide, not just in the U.S., but when we're out in the streets this summer.
And how do you like that, folks? I have been watching this for the past, yep, there we go. I have been watching this for about the past 10 or 15 minutes. Let me get the video stream back up here. I have been watching this for the past 10 or 15 minutes. While Clif was talking, as he gets closer and closer to the subject that we're breaching right now, the connection was being essentially hammered. Not at my end, but somewhere in between. Somebody was essentially like flipping a switch when Boris Artemenko is on the show and they take him off the air. This is essentially what happened. Yes, he is currently offline now. Somebody has taken Clif High offline on this show. You heard it here. As he was getting closer and closer to the truth, done. So, while we wait for Skype to attempt to get him back, and I don't think that's going to happen. At this point, I am reluctant to actually call his landline because I don't know exactly how these people... here we go. Yeah, apparently he is back. Hold on one second while I send him a text message. I just told him that I believe that we have been cut off on purpose. And we'll see. Let me see here. Okay. Right now the connection speed between Clif and myself for reestablishing the phone call has been cut. Hold on a second, and we may have Clif High back. Clif, I was just telling the audience that we were in fact cut off. I've been watching it at this end for the past 5 or 10 minutes as the connection has been hammered somewhere in between the two of us. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, we're good now, and we did indeed have a spike here on. I've got some monitoring software, and we got a big spike on our router, so they're hitting on our router here.
Yeah, I can tell by the way your voice is. It's kind of breaking up, but I can understand you to a certain extent. I think the audience can hear you. Go ahead and continue with the thought that you were expounding on.
Yeah. This summer, well, starting now, of course, in Greece, but all around the planet, everybody's going to be out on the streets. As the monetary system comes unglued, they're going to try and shovel us into war, and they're going to try and take advantage of our inherent nature towards violence. We'll be wanting to be violent because of the energy from the sun.
So that's essentially exactly what we're seeing right now. This is what I've been observing for the past 3 or 4 months. Is every time there's a solar storm, you know, people have to be aware when there is a magnetic storm coming from the sun, because that's when I see it, not the X-rays, the magnetic storm, and it's doing something to people's personalities.
To our poor little brains. Yeah, it's warping us with its magnetic influence. Yes.
Yes.
And there are some things you can do. Now, I hesitate to tell you about various different herbs and this kind of stuff because it all relates to your body type, but some things are relatively innocuous. And so I know the nuclear industry uses lemon balm tea twice a day to help the nuclear workers overcome the problems of positive high-energy particles. The oxidation, they call it, of nuclear energy. And so lemon balm tea could be used to reduce some of the effects. So there are things we can do beyond merely being aware of it.
Right, so lemon balm tea is something good for circumventing this. What other types of things that are more...
Well, the problem
I want to say mainstream, something that somebody would eat every day.
Oh, you could have blueberries. You could any of the heavy-duty antioxidants. You know, you could get into the blueberries, the vitamin C component in some of the citrus fruits, grapefruit, this kind of thing, have a tendency to scrub as well. The issue for us is the following. We will experience this as a level of amplification of the circuitry of our nerves, so to speak. If we think of ourselves as standing waves, that means we're sort of an energy antenna. And if you were to extend your arms out, in your arms there's a tracery of nerves. Those nerves are going to be electrified at a higher level than they're used to. So you're going to feel twitchy or this kind of thing. That has a tendency to influence all of your other systems, the endocrine system, hormonal, and so on, which is why we get more testosterone, why you get more irritated, and all of this. The real issues for us, though, will be in relating to this for those individuals that would want to compensate normally in alcohol or drug abuse. So we're going to see, and also things like suicide and other forms of mental illness. So you'll find that people that are already mentally ill, one form or another, an alcoholic, using an addictive substance, or exhibiting mental behavior problems, will react inappropriately because they will have no clue as to what's going on and have no coping skills. So we're going to have to really watch out for these individuals as well. Unfortunately, this pretty much describes a lot of the people in the powers that be, as well as in the upper echelons of the officialdom, where the stress is so heavy that you find serious drug users and alcoholics in the higher levels of military and politicians and so on. These people are going to go absolute bananas on us, and I don't know if it'll do any good to point out to them, yo man, you're in an altered state of consciousness, just chill. But we need to start thinking about it because it's going to affect us all.
And is this it? I mean, is this? And I'm sure you mentioned this before. Maybe I've just plain forgotten because I'm keeping an eye on so much stuff here at this end because of this connection issue. Is this what we're going to be seeing coming up in the next week or so with this? It is. With this cascade, is this all part of it?
With the release language, but it does not, in my mind, it's not a causal agent for the release language. It is merely one of the things that we know grow from March through summer.
Okay. So this is, do you think this is going to be due to a natural solar event, or is this going to be natural?
Yeah, it's cyclical, and it's natural in the sense it's coming from the materium, from the natural world. That brings up another issue, and we should take just a brief moment here. Let's finish this subject here. The sun is in its excited state for whatever the cause is, and it's putting out all this energy. It's affecting not only the planet in the form of the magnetic pole and the weird weather and everything, but it's affecting us, and we should not be surprised that it'll affect our consciousness as well, as that consciousness is expressed through the material product of our bodies, the brain. And so since the brain is just a material part of the planet, just like a rock or the planet itself, it will be impacted by these energies. Unfortunately, we use it a lot, so we need to be aware it's not going to be at its peak. Now, let's divert for a second to a subject I want to cover just briefly, and that is the idea of the materium itself. We had in our long-term data showing that in 2012 we would cross a threshold of complexity where humans would be able to start manipulating the templates of the materium. Okay. And that's where we think some of the problems that may exist this year come in. Now, curiously, I'm trying to plow myself through this book, Sands of Time, by Sean David Morton, in which he claims to lay out the science by which time travel is possible, because that is one of the potential causes or components that could indeed lead to what Terence McKenna called the transcendental object at the end of time, and that would be the sudden announcement that we have time travel. And just because Clif doesn't see it in his understanding of materium does not mean it isn't real and can't happen. I just particularly want to know the science of it so I can noodle on this and gnaw on it. But we sure seem to have linguistic evidence that the powers that be are gearing up CERN and some of their other projects and pouring in all kinds of money, people, and energy as though they were facing some kind of very short-term deadline, like a month away. and I just don't know what they're reacting to, other than they may know the release language is coming, and they may know the cause of it, whereas I don't.
Interesting. Continue on with this materium discussion, because this is fascinating, and I think this could very well be the crux of the whole situation that we're seeing now.
The materium idea, relative to how humans are, it is possible to take the idea of technology and at one end put fire, and at the other end put the ability to have Star Trek kind of replicators that you push a button and it cooks you a turkey dinner without there ever having actually been a turkey there, right?
Right.
And at that same level of stuff is also free energy. The idea that you can just extract electricity from the atoms around you without having to have an electrical socket near you. And so the whole electrical grid idea goes away and humans become vastly empowered. At some point in complexity, we will cross into that level of threshold. That may also be something we accomplish this year as a race, as a species. And that would be the ability to alter the template of reality as it creates itself. We would do this mechanistically and probably with software and computers involved. And it's the same kind of power, if you will, as those people that get the cities, the extraordinary powers from decades of meditation, where they can create stuff out of thin air because they know how reality wants to create itself, and they can tweak with that with the energy from their mind. Now, if we can do it with machines, maybe we can get stuff to last. And that opens up a whole new world that makes Kurzweil's singularity and that utopia seem pale.
Now, does this relate to the stream?
The stream is the way in which, in a sense it does, okay, because we're all talking about the same thing. The thing that the physicists call the Dirac sea is also the quanta source. It's also what I call continuous creation destruction. The stream is the ability of the mind to perceive the continuous creation destruction nature of reality at a higher level of frequency than your ordinary operating 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 frames a minute. So imagine what it is like to enter the stream, because when you're entering the stream, you're not seeing the pan hanging in the or sitting on the shelf there. You're seeing the shelf as the vibratory material it actually is, and you're seeing the different kind of vibration that is the pan apparently sitting on the shelf, and you can actually see the boundary layer between them and all of this kind of thing. And that's the stream. It's the ability to upshift your perceptive abilities at the conscious level. So mechanistically, it is the same as the source, the force in the Star Wars movies, the ability for replicators to work in Star Trek. Once we cross that threshold, all things are open to us. Are we gods? No, but then most gods I've run across are assholes, and so, we can get to be that way ourselves without needing them around. But we'd be pretty cool. We'd be able to, do some really interesting things.
Now, is this what the McKennas were doing with the, in the 60s with the, what were they using, psychotropic drugs or something down in
Sure,
the...
they were using psilocybe cubensis mushrooms in Corella in Colombia, I think it is. And they were exploring the other side of consciousness. Basically, you have to understand, you've been told a whole series of lies as to what reality is. And reality at its simplest point can be described as all of us are living inside an aquarium. And that's what we call the materium, and that's where material world exists. But only a little tiny part of us lives inside the aquarium, the way that your hand is inside a glove box. Mm-hmm. Or is inside a puppet. Okay, the rest of you is outside the puppet, and so we have most of us outside the materium, and only a little bit of us that's inside the materium. And once we, inside the materium, learn to manipulate the materium, then consciousness takes up a whole order of complexity beyond what we can even imagine at the moment. Now, what they were doing with the drugs in their experiment with the McKennas was they were actually reaching beyond the materium to reach in and interact with the consciousness that exists on the greater scale on the other side of the materium. We exist out there, but so do other consciousnesses. And you can actually, if you get to the point where you can meditate really well and you can enter the stream, you'll be able to sense the other consciousness there as well. And you can tell they're not human.
That is something that I wanted to ask you about during this part of the discussion. Who are they? Where do they come from?
I don't know. It'd be speculation. If I were to put a name, or words don't exist in the stream. It's not like I'm going up to them and converse with them in words. And I've had some problematic interactions with other beings in the stream. So basically, I don't screw with them. There's a couple friendly guys that are happy and nice, and they're okay to have around. But so I'm reluctant to go and intrude, but also basically I'm doing other stuff there. I'm working on myself. I'm not trying to explore it at that level. And anybody that comes to you and tells you that, oh yeah, this is, you know, so-and-so from this star system, they're full of it. You know, it's all speculation at that point because words don't exist there.
So it's I've never experienced it. I may have come close a couple of times when I was younger. I did a lot of meditating, but somewhere along the line, my brain seems to have lost that ability to do it. It's more of emotional feelings that you get rather than actual words, isn't it?
No, emotions are there, and you're aware of them, but they ride on the surface of things in the stream. So somebody who sees aura might stand in front of you and they say, "Oh, you've got a reddish aura," and you feel angry at the moment. And what's happening is your emotion is expressing itself, and they're picking it up in their sensory apparatus as a slight pinkening in your aura. And in that sense, you see emotions as vibrations that skitter across the core surface of the being. And they can push emotions at you, and you can push emotions out into the stream. But really, there isn't a whole lot of point to it because it's kind of like actually being in a stream. You're always swimming against the current. There's always stuff pushing on you and interacting with you that is the stuff of creation. And so it very much is like being in a stream and trying to get from one point to another and dealing with all the currents. You're not going to stop and chat with the turtle when you're trying to get your butt to the other side.
That's a very good analogy there. You are getting hit really, really hard at your end. So
I know. I can see it on my voltage meters here, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask you one last question, and then we're going to end the show. In the last, I think it was 2 reports ago, the woman of scars, whatever happened to her? Are we still seeing her?
That was a wide meme. That was not a specific woman. That was multiples. And that meme was one of the best we'd ever seen fulfilled, and it topped out in like 92%. So I think it has actually run its course. So that we have a small minor component of it that will surface, and it'll probably come up in all of this chaos, and I don't know that we'll actually be able to pick it up after we move into March and the loss of, or in the changes in whatever regard to the mainstream media. So, but that was a staggering meme because it was so wide and it had such a high fulfillment level. We actually count a success when we get 50% in multiple languages of the forecast words. And that one was way up there.
Well, so is this somebody that we can put an identity on, or is it a bunch of different people?
It's a bunch of different people.
Not necessarily a woman, is it?
Actually, so far we've only identified women that have been within the linguistics and shown up the visibility. And we've got 4 or 5, and we expect more out of one of them, and I'm not going to say any more because I don't want to preload anything.
Right.
But we will see a brief escalation of that meme. It should, probably the way things are working out, it'll be totally fulfilled by the time we move into late August.
Okay. All right, and what we need to look out for is going to be coming up in the next couple of weeks then, the important thing.
Well, no, it's not a trigger. It's not an event. This is what I keep trying to tell people. That the powers that be are going to try and shove a war down our throats, so they may try and create an event, but it is not there naturally. It is not part of our language. There's nothing in there saying that they're going to able to make this be a success, which is why I'm out there working my butt off to tell everybody, yo, look over there. They're trying to sink that boat. And they're evil bastards, and we need to be watching them, because as long as we're watching them, they won't do it. They need to operate in secrecy. So there's nothing that says this is an accomplished fact, but we changed to release language regardless, and these people, I think, really want to control it.
Okay. I believe that I believe that I understand what you're saying now. And Clif, we're going to let you go because you're obviously getting hammered at your end. Either myself or somebody from my staff will be in touch with you in the next couple of days so that we can find out, so you can tell us exactly, well, after it happens.
Sure. No worries.
I'm trying to get it. I'm trying to get it out. You gotta let us know. You gotta let us know in case we miss
see
it.
If I'm right, you'll let me know. If I'm correct, you won't have to have me telling you. It's like this guy, Ben Fulford. Okay, Ben Fulford does a whole lot of stuff. He's out there saying, "Let's go and do this." There's mass arrests and this kind of thing, and it's like bogus. If there were mass arrests, I wouldn't need him to tell me.
We'd all know it.
Correct.
We'd all know it. One other thing. The things that we've been seeing in the reports about people disappearing is. Do you think this is the people that are coming into these corporations for just a short time and saying, "Oh, brother, this is a bigger mess than I thought"?
I actually think physical disappearances of the powers that be is they hide themselves. A lot of people have got a lot of dirt. They know that the big cleaning rag is coming, and they're going to hide from it, and that's what's going to happen. And we're seeing it now. There's been an unprecedented wave of resignations in the political and the corporate world. We should try and follow where these people go because they're going to grab their money and run.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard there's a lot of people running. We're going to follow that up on some future shows. I think when Alex comes on Saturday, we're going to be able to talk to him about that because he's probably got a couple of pretty good clues about it. Clif, we're going to let you go. We're going to end the show now. I appreciate you coming on. We really, really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to talk to us, and apparently the many thousands of people that have been listening to the show tonight. And
that I find staggering, but yeah, no worries, Guy. I wish I had more time, but I'm a busy fellow, so yeah.
Yes. Anyways, Clif, thank you very much for coming out. We really, really appreciate it, and we'll be in touch over the next few days. Okay.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was our guest, Clif High. And as you heard during the last 15 minutes of the show, he's getting hammered very hard at his end on his routers by somebody in between. Could it be the powers that be? Who knows? At any rate, we're going to try to get this up on YouTube so that they can reject it. And we're going to go ahead and start repeating the show so that everybody can enjoy it over and over again. And the MP3 will be up and streaming on the Windows Media Stream shortly as soon as I save it and do some editing on it. In the meantime, I'm going to turn the Windows Media Stream back on, and we're going to start with the previous Alex Bachman interview. Those of you that want to see the repeat of Clif High immediately, you can see it on the video stream. It will start up again in a second. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget, Friday night we're having Sheriff Mack on. Saturday night we are having Alex Bachman on again. And we'll see you then. Thank you for tuning in. And hey, this is pretty cool.